Hello, this is Brian Hegney, instructor of Game and Interactive Media Design, and for this, I'm just going to introduce what I'm going to be doing in Photoshop, and after I do what I hope is a short introduction, I'm going to just spend probably a couple hours, maybe 1 hour, photoshopping something up, and I'll play it back at high speed. What I'm going to do is first open up that UV render, the final UV render that I laid out, and I'm going to put a layer underneath it. I'm going to call it background layer. I'm going to go ahead and use a nice brown, and I'm just going to fill this with foreground color, and yeah, because I want to see that. Alright, and this is actually pretty high res. This is 2048 by 2048, and I know what all of these are, right? And so what I'm going to be doing is going through and basically getting my artist rendering, and I'm going to be using this as a backdrop. I might not always use it exactly. I may actually paint my own version of this. And I might try to recreate some of the stippling. If I just copy it from here, you see the artist shaded it back here. Well, I don't want the image to shade it. I want the lighting in my model to shade it, and maybe my shadows render from 3D Studio Max to shade it as well. So I might just recreate all of this by using a series of brushes. So I'm gonna be changing my foreground color as much as I can. I will be painting on different layers, so you'll see me create a whole bunch of new layers in this panel. I'm just going to be creating a whole bunch of layers for each portion. I'm probably going to be going to my brush and going and changing my brush styles as much as I can. We don't really have many to choose from. And the other thing I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be creating what's called smart objects, and that is if I go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and paint just like a smiley face here, right? So if I paint a smiley face here, that would look so dumb. Oops, I painted on my background layer. I'm definitely not going to be painting on different layers, as in I'm gonna have a designated layer for background, a designated layer for face, so I'm gonna use this new layer button. I'm going to call this, I'm gonna be renaming my layers, calling it face, painting something like a face on it, and sometimes I'm going to be right-clicking this layer and saying convert to smart object, and what that's going to do is that's going to allow me to, let's say if you were in Photoshop, you'd hit Control T. Here it's Alt Control T, but I'm going to free transform it and rotate it. What that does is it allows me to rotate an image without destroying the pixelization, because what this is essentially doing is it's keeping a copy of the original face as I drew it. You know what's going to help make that a little bit more clear is I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to call this test line, and I'm going to create a little square, and I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm going to fill that square with this color. You see that? And I'm going to duplicate that layer, call that test line copy. I'm going to call this test line smart. And you didn't do that for me, so test line smart. Now if I put those here, which one is test line smart? Oops. Okay, let me redo that. Okay, now the top one is test line smart and the bottom is just test line. I'm going to convert test line smart to a smart object. And you see this little icon on the bottom right corner of your layer. It's fairly similar in the real Photoshop, but not totally the same. And what I'm going to do is free transform both of them like that. And so what you can see is Photoshop trying to bridge, turn what used to be a straight line into, how it's going to go across these squares, right? And so I'm going to do now that to test line dumb. Is it Alt Control T? It certainly is. I'm going to rotate that. Very similar. So they're both very similar now. And, you know, I can select this one and just move it down. You can see that, right? Watch what happens when I rotate test line smart. Oops, of course. Control-Alt-T. When I rotate this back to 0 degrees, that's perfectly, almost perfectly fine. Is this actually 0? No, it's negative 0.5. So when we hit 0, there. Now it should be perfect. Let's examine it. Oh yeah, look at that line. Zoom back out. With test line, if I did the same exact thing, oh, it doesn't quite remember its angle, number one. And when I like, there's no way to say, you know, what was its original angle like? So let's double click that. Now you can see how cruddy that looks. So whenever I do anything to like an object or create a layer, I try to make it a smart object just so that I can manipulate it, rotate it all around, scale it up, scale it down, and nothing bad is going to happen to it. The other thing I do when I'm going to paint is I might even, just so that you know what I'm doing, I might change the opacity down of my paint layer. And I like to do that when I paint things on top of each other, like I'm trying to paint, if I wanted to paint stuff on this wood, right? I might click my foreground color to choose this wood and then choose a slightly lighter one. And I'm going to maybe put my brush in an opacity like 40%, and I can paint on it. Okay. And that's kind of nice. I mean, that's kind of ugly right now. And it's ugly because, well, let's see. Because my brush is a little bit small. The nice thing about painting with a brush that is not as opaque is you can start to build up slight variations of information, right? Where my brush was thinner, you could have seen that. Okay. So now it's starting to look like I'm painting it. And I usually do this with a bunch of different layers. So I might do this with a lighter version. I might add a layer on top of here and even create another version of this. And I can even take each of these layers and make those transparent as well if I need to. I don't know, you may see me do that. I'm not sure if I'm going to do that. But I usually, when I paint with color, I like to paint with like 3 different versions of the hue, a light, a medium, and a dark, and change up the opacity of my brush, and then play with the layer even afterwards. So that's what I'm going to be doing, so keep an eye out for that, and I will now go ahead and spend like an hour of my time doing this. And I'm going to have a lot of fun, and I hope you have a lot of fun. Bye!